So we did talk a lot about barriers, but luckily there are some strategies that we can take to neutralize these barriers that might be standing in the way of creating those transformative relationships. So take a moment to think of a relationship you would like to strengthen. It could be a colleague or a student or maybe a family member in your school community. And keep this person in mind as we explore some strategies for building relationships together. And to support you, Healthier Generation has created a guide with ideas to build staff relationships and move towards that transformative space. And this resource will equip you with many different strategies to use at various levels of relationships and psychological safety, right? We heard about safety as a barrier, safety in the chat. So we know that there are different levels. We know that it's not realistic to ask people to share their deepest parts of themselves on day one, right? So in this guide, we scaffolded activities to work towards making room for that transformative space. And this resource comes with printables and templates and sample slide decks to help facilitate some of the activities that are in the guide. So it hopefully should make it really easy to put some of these ideas into action throughout the school year. And two foundational strategies that we want to highlight to build transformative relationships are sharing stories and building together. So let's think back on our ideas of transactional and transformative relationship, those two kind of definitions that we set out with during the start of our time. So in that transactional space, we were really focused on task management and completion, really just getting the job done at the end of the day. And unfortunately, though, well-meaning efforts like always kicking off a staff meeting with an icebreaker or starting your class with a check-in can start to feel that way, very, very transactional. So we're going to present a few examples of how to move some common school-based relationship building practices into a more meaningful and intentional or transformative practice versus one that just kind of checks the box for relationship building. And through these strategies, we are working towards increasing collaboration and fostering shared decision making to minimize the barriers that keep us in that transactional space. So during the rest of our time together, we will examine how each of these strategies can be used to foster relationships with our students, our staff, and our families. So let's get started with our first strategy, which is sharing stories. And the more we know about our colleagues and our students, the better we can engage with them, understand their perspective, and provide support to them. So picture that relationship we asked you to keep in mind. Can you list 3 facts about them that are not related to your job or not related to the education environment? And if not, you may want to spend some more time getting to know that person. So building relationships requires unlearning those assumptions and prejudices and learning different and new perspectives and new experiences. And one way we can do that is by sharing stories. And what I mean by when we say sharing stories is we mean making space for meaningful check-ins, integrating storytelling into our time together, and monitoring our assumptions and knowledge about each other. So one way to share stories with our colleagues is to integrate check-ins during already scheduled activities such as staff meetings, right? We don't want to add too much to the plate. So embedding it into already existing structures is a great way to help staff build connection. You might have heard of Peaches and Pits or something like it called Roses and Thorns, but Peaches and Pits is an easy way to add into a regularly scheduled staff meeting and help staff connect on things that are giving them energy, which are the peaches, as well as work through things that are posing challenges, the pits. And this activity helps staff focus on and share about what gives them energy throughout the day. What lights a fire in their belly, right? What is a good thing that happened so that others can better understand what brings this person joy and what brings them connection to their values. And it also helps staff collaborate on the pits so that they can work together through challenges and know that people are not alone when they face some pits or some challenges. So let's go ahead and practice together. Take the next 20 seconds or so to reflect on one peach that gave you energy this week or maybe last week since we're at the beginning of the week. What is one thing that helped you stay connected to your why and stay connected and grounded in your values? So let's switch gears and start thinking about how to share stories with our students. So there's a bunch of different ways, and this is just kind of a smattering of a few. But you could be leveraging informal time. So before and after school class or lunchtime, anytime you can have a quick chat with your students. You can also use info cards. So have students share on an index card and keep that index card on your desk in a box so that they can add to it throughout the year and write notes about things that they want you to know. Sometimes it's easier for people to write something down than it is for them to share verbally. So having that written option is a really powerful thing for students sometimes. You can also establish check-in time. So whether it is a set morning meeting in homeroom or advisory, or a check-in during your classes, just allowing time and space for students to share what they have going on. And you can even do that peaches and pits activity with your students. It's a pretty generic and easy one to do with people of all ages. You can also attend community events. So be a part of what is happening in your students' communities and learn more about them and their interests by attending the events that are important to them. And you can integrate storytelling. So consider how you can learn more about students through the things that you're assigning, right? What are the lessons that you can embed storytelling in, or even in this nutrition ed lesson that we heard about in the chat? Like, how can we embed some storytelling into nutrition education lessons as well through culture and different foods that we're serving and eating? And lastly, make sure to monitor your knowledge and your assumptions. So, what is your goal for getting to know the stories of all of your students? And how can you track how you're doing? How can you hold yourself accountable for assumptions? And not only is it important to share stories with your students, but it's also important to share stories with your families and caregivers. And since families are not in school with you 6 hours a day, I do want to acknowledge that it can be really challenging to form transformative relationships with families and caregivers, especially if you are in like the secondary level where family members might be a little bit more hands off than at the elementary level. So, when engaging with families, it's important to offer a variety of times and modalities to interact with one another. You might consider both in person and digital methods, such as greeting families during the start bell or using an email or grading platform to send messages to families. And additionally, you might get to know your families by learning about their culture. In class celebrations can be a great way to engage families and learn about the specific traditions that are meaningful to them. And lastly, through these stories that we're learning from our families, you can learn about the many assets and strengths that each family brings to your classroom and really utilize that in your lessons and in, class time with your students.